The dust on Meridian Flats didn't settle the way Earth dust did. It hung, it drifted. It got into everything, the seals, the filters, the corners of Yara Vasquez's eyes. And it stayed there, patient, like it had been waiting 400 million years for something warm to come along and ruin. She pressed her forehead against the cold porthole glass and watched the planet breathe rust. Behind her, Tomas was arguing with Mission Control. Again, she could tell by the silence. He'd go quiet when they said something stupid. The way a man goes quiet when he's counting to 10 and only making it to about 4. Want us to wait another 72 hours before surface contact, he said. What? For Apex to get its data first. She turned. Mas Reyes had the kind of face that had been lived in hard. Crow's feet at 38, a jaw that hadn't fully unclenched since the Atacama trials, hair going silver at the temples, in a way that made him look less like an astronaut and more like someone's exhausted father. He was looking at the handset like it had personally insulted him. So a robot gets to be first, she said. A robot and $6 billion of private capital, yeah. The third member of their crew, Dr. Pita Havili, didn't look up from the soil sample trays. She'd been cataloging for 11 hours. This is fine, she said, in the tone of someone for whom nothing was fine. The Apex Industries probe, they'd named it Ares because, of course, they had landed 300 kilometers to their northwest 9 days ago. It was faster than them, lighter than them, and it didn't need to sleep or eat or argue with ground control about protein ratios. It had been designed by 1,700 engineers across 4 continents and cost more than the GDPs of several small nations. It communicated in microsecond pulses and moved in smooth, precise arcs that made human walking look like a drunk trying to find a bathroom. Yara had watched the live feed on the approach. Ares moved like water finding its level. Everything deliberate. Nothing wasted. She'd grown up watching the old footage. The original landings. The grainy black and white of boots hitting gray dust. The static crackle of voices going 60,000 miles before they reached human ears. Something about those images had never left her. Not the flags, not the speeches, the moments in between. An astronaut sitting on a rock, just sitting, staring out at nothing. A glove picking up a stone and turning it over slowly. A human being, alone in the universe and somehow not afraid. Ares didn't sit. Ares didn't turn stones over. Ares processed and transmitted and moved to the next grid square. Not waiting 72 hours, Yara said. Tomas set the handset down very carefully, which was how she knew he agreed with her. The EV prep took 4 hours. The suits had been designed for efficiency, not comfort. Everything about them communicated the essential truth that space didn't care whether you were comfortable. Yara had a ritual she'd developed during the long transit. She went through each check 3 times, but the third time she did it with her eyes closed. Hands learning the shape of survival. She'd started doing it after a bad dream somewhere between the asteroid belt and Mars. A dream where she'd looked down and found a crack in the wrist joint, and she'd known in the dream that she'd checked it, but her hands hadn't remembered. She never had the dream after that. Tomas watched her do it without comment. He'd stopped asking about the ritual 6 months ago. Some things you don't need to understand to respect. They stepped out onto the surface at 0611 local, and Mars hit Yara the way it always did in her chest. A pressure that wasn't atmospheric, that wasn't physical, that was something's closer to awe fighting with terror, and coming out the other side as something she didn't have a word for. The sky was the color of a bruise healing wrong. The horizon was close, too close, like the planet was smaller than it should be, which of course it was. The silence was total and absolute except for the sound of her own breathing recycled back to her. Warm and human, and impossibly alive. Tomas came up beside her. For a long moment neither of them said anything. "Kay," he said finally, voice rough. "Kay." They walked northeast, following the bearing Pita had calculated from the spectral analysis. The ground was uneven, scoured by winds that had been old before anything on Earth had learned to crawl, and every step required attention. Not the easy, automatic attention of walking, but the full, deliberate attention of someone who understands that the ground is trying to kill them gently, and they have to keep saying no. Ares found the signal first. They were watching the telemetry on Tomas's wrist display when the Apex feed updated. Ares had deviated from its programmed grid, drawn by something in the subsurface resonance readings that the probe's tertiary array had flagged. 17 seconds later, Mission Control patched through the priority alert. Subsurface thermal anomaly. Biological markers probable. Ares was moving toward it. Yara ran the numbers. Ares was faster than them on flat ground. The terrain between the probe and the anomaly was rated clear in the topographic models. They were 3 kilometers further, but on a bearing that cut across a ridge, Ares would have to circumnavigate. "How long is the ridge bypass?" she asked. Tomas already had it. 41 minutes at Ares's standard traverse rate. She looked at the ridge. It was not a kind piece of terrain. It was the kind of terrain that had opinions about people who thought they could cross it. "We can do it in 25, she said. 25. Tomas repeated very carefully, in a voice that meant, he thought, 25 was ambitious, but he was going to put that thought in a box and set it on fire. Gee. They climbed. It wasn't technical climbing. No ropes, no anchors. But the rock was fractured and unreliable, and the suits were not designed for this. And every handhold was a negotiation. Yara went first because she'd done the most terrain work in training, and also because she was, as Tomas had once told her after his third bourbon, constitutionally incapable of letting other people go first when things got difficult. She'd taken that as a compliment. She was not entirely sure it had been meant as one. Halfway up, a section of rock gave way under her left boot, and she dropped 4 feet, before her right hand caught a ledge, and her left caught Tomas's forearm, and they hung there together, breathing hard, while Mars watched them with absolute indifference. "I've got you," Tomas said, which was technically the other way around, and she said nothing, because that was the kind of thing you didn't correct. They made the top in 22 minutes. The anomaly was in a depression 300 meters below the ridge's eastern face, a shallow bowl in the regolith, where something had, over geological time, created a pocket of comparative warmth. Even from the ridge they could see the color difference. Not rust, not ochre, something darker, something that had the quality of having changed. Ares was still 8 minutes out. They descended, faster than was smart, and arrived at the edge of the depression, breathing in a way that the suit computers noted with small concerned tones they both ignored. Up close, the color was unmistakable. A mat of something low and dark, spreading across the sheltered stone in patches no larger than a human palm. But there and real and alive, in the way that made everything Yara had ever believed about the universe reorganize itself around a new fact. She knelt down. The suit wouldn't let her touch it. Contamination protocols, both directions. But she brought her faceplate down to within 10 centimeters of the nearest patch and looked at it the way she'd looked at things as a child. The way she'd looked at tide pools and anthills and the complicated underside of leaves, with the full unglamorous attention of someone for whom the small things had always been the real things. Life. Old life. Life that had been here when Earth was still figuring out what a cell was. She was aware, distantly, that she was crying, and that the suit's environmental system was compensating for the added humidity, and that this was deeply undignified, and she did not care at all. Tomas crouched beside her. He didn't say anything for a long time. "Peta's going to lose her mind," he said finally. "Peta's going to be furious she's not here," Yara said, and laughed, and it came out broken and bright at the same time, and Tomas laughed too, and it sounded like the most human sound she had ever heard in her life. The Ares feed updated on his wrist. The probe was 4 minutes out. Already, its instruments were painting the depression with sensor sweeps, building a data portrait before it had even arrived, quantifying what they had found into something clean and transmissible and owned. "Mission Control wants us to stand back," Tomas said, reading the burst message. "Contamination zone. Ares has priority data rights per the Apex-NASA Joint Framework Agreement." She looked at him. He looked at her. "I'm not standing back," she said. "I know," he said. "Just wanted to tell you what they said." When Ares came over the depression's rim, it moved with the same liquid precision she'd watched on approach. Smooth, efficient, each degree of trajectory calculated and optimized, nothing wasted, nothing uncertain. It was a beautiful machine. She could acknowledge that without apology. It was beautiful the way a surgical instrument is beautiful, in the way that perfect function creates its own kind of form. swept the depression with its primary array, and then it stopped. Not paused, stopped. A long, unusual halt that the apex telemetry would later show lasted 11.3 seconds, which was an eternity in machine terms, which was what happened when you fed a system optimized for quantification, a phenomenon it could measure but not parse. What Ares could not compute was this. Two humans, in bulky suits, kneeling in Martian dust. One of them, with fogged optics from moisture contamination. The other, with his hand resting on her shoulder in the useless, necessary way that humans rest their hands on each other when something too large is happening. Two people who had crossed a ridge that wasn't in the protocols, who had run numbers that weren't in the mission plan, who had a combined heart rate that the Apex biometric overlay would flag as medically anomalous, who had made it here not because they were faster or more precise or better designed, but because they had decided. Ares had been given a directive and followed it. They had wanted this. There's a difference. It's not a small one. Yara sat back on her heels and looked at the machine looking at her. She thought about the old footage again. The astronaut on the rock, just sitting, just being. She thought about how many people had told her, over how many years, that the age of wonder was over. That space was logistics now. Infrastructure, resource extraction, data rights agreements between multinational corporations and governmental bodies. She thought about the moment, 400 feet up the ridge when the rock gave way, and Tomas caught her arm, and the universe contracted to that single point of contact, and then expanded again. She thought, we keep going places. We keep showing up. We bring our grief and our bad dreams, and our rituals and our laughter, to places that have never known any of those things. And we cannot help ourselves, and that cannot be nothing. Tell Mission Control we're documenting the find, she said. They won't like it, Tomas said. No, she said. They won't. He sent the message. She documented. She photographed every patch from every angle the suit camera could achieve, narrated her observations into the recorder in a voice that was still not entirely steady, and then she sat back in the Martian dust and just looked at it for a while, the same way the astronaut had looked at nothing in the old footage. Except this wasn't nothing, this was everything, and she wanted to look at it before the world decided what it meant. Ares resumed its sweep. Probe moved around them in efficient arcs. Politely, the way machines are polite, which is to say without actually noticing them. Above them, the Martian sky went through its colors. Yara had been told, it turned from red to blue at sunset, a thin band of it near the horizon, and she'd filed that information away for months without fully believing it. But there it was, blue, shade, thin as hope but real. She pointed. Tomas looked. Neither of them said anything. Because some things you don't say. The Apex press release went out 11 hours later. It was 4 paragraphs of clean, professional language crediting the Ares unit with the primary discovery of subsurface biological material on Mars, with a footnote acknowledging the presence of the joint NASA crew during confirmation of findings. The footnote was 11 words. Yara read it in the habitat, eating something the packaging described as chicken tikka masala, with the stubborn optimism of a label that had never met the contents. PETA had not spoken in 2 hours except in numbers, which was how she processed things that were too large. Tomas was looking out the porthole at the dark. You know what I keep thinking about, he said. What? The ridge, he said. 22 minutes. We didn't have to do that. Chose to do that. Yeah, she said. That matters, he said. That's got to matter. She thought about the blue at the edge of the sky. She thought about a hand on stone, finding a hold. She thought about 2 people kneeling in rust-colored dust, laughing because what else do you do when the universe finally shows you what it's been hiding? It does, she said. It will. Outside, the dust hung in the thin air, patient, not going anywhere, the same as it had been for 500 million years. Something had knelt down and looked at it today, and that was going to be true now forever. That was theirs. No footnote could take it.